was watching some show like that. It's like one of those Americans.
Okay, so it didn't come. I didn't.
Yeah, so
So I
show me
pull it out.
something I'll be doing on TV.
So I pull out the.
There you go. I think it's go out to come up. There it is. I'm gonna get a platform for my laptop.
All right, now we're doing this.
Actually, we don't. So, any event involving Alan, there's a mandatory whiskey shot for everyone who is going. So I want to get that going.
Wow, I didn't know this, Alan. This is kind of interesting.
No, y'all.
I'm excited.
Oh, good, because y'all. Okay, here.
You don't have a choice still.
I'm okay with the whiskey. Like, you want the whiskey? Something worth
I agree.
I got no problem.
All right, got it.
Yeah, I think like.
Add some questions,
So
lock the door, give us some whiskey, film us. Let's see what happens. I see what's going on
Well,
here.
wait a minute, Elon Musk, and that guy just got busted out. It's like, let's have an interview. That's right. I love it. That was really hilarious. Talk about like sometimes catching people off. Or you know what I mean? Just like something. Oh yeah, sure.
I'll have to listen to that. I just heard about this.
It's a couple that's really fun.
Don't have
If they have it, totally filmed.
So we can take your
Yeah. And it's like that. It's kind of like it just almost if he was in the
I just heard you.
like it just kind of just guard, just kind of off guard, and he's just pretty loose.
This is your camera. That is where you see what's going on with that.
Let me get my charger for we were out playing the game.
Okay.
ZQ, actually told me a little bit what Q7 stands for. No, it's a secret code. I won't tell anybody.
Be spreading that shit around. It's ontological mechanics. Oh.
Did anyone share the YouTube link directly rather than the Facebook event?
No.
Wonderful.
Yay.
Thank you. We had to update the link. So, yeah.
Thank y'all for coming. Seriously, this is very exciting.
Sure, Mark.
You all have been, trapped in a ruin with me.
See, you see it from that perspective. It could be the other way around. I'm sure part of us all like a captive audience. Be careful. We all might like to talk a lot. Maybe saying uncle before it's over.
Just cut it out.
All I'm just saying, when the gas comes out from the floor, just breathe in as much as you can.
That's what I don't want to get the lights, like at the bar, like it's time to go.
We tried to get out.
I saw them. There is a key lock at the bottom.
There is a key lock. Now just breathe in as much as you can. Enjoy the gas. It's gonna be fun.
The light switches, man. I don't know when you got one. What'd you say, share?
Just want to say that, I find that this collection of people are some of the smartest assholes I know.
Not smart asshole.
Smart assholes. And I have heard all of y'all collectively talk in detail about what y'all know. And it has always been a desire to get all those fuckers in one room and map out something. And I finally have found a way to do that. Me and Steven together and Meg collectively, have trapped all of you, and we are very nice. And we've been working this together for some time. Me and Steven did something like this a year ago. Some similar to this, more raw, not with as much as a direction. Last time we were just collecting people, gathering them, and getting them to discuss ideas of what they do. And I guess this is a perfect iteration of that, like a, reimagining of that. And, seeing y'all here finally confirms that we're on the right path. We can say important shit today and might inspire some asshole tomorrow to be capable of maybe manifesting many of the things that we're talking about. Even ourselves hoping that maybe we will be able to inspire each other to manifest newer things. Like, it's an opportunity for us to learn from each other. Like, I know I'm just an echo chamber to myself, and I know we are all echo chambers to ourselves, but trapped in the room, we'll be forced to hear each other. And, that's the first thing that I've always wanted to, take away from, as we see identity, something, it's always identity, something that seems to be more walls now than its its origins, where it was like, we have now ways to call what we are. Now those what we call what we are now walls. And we know this technology has helped make those walls more soundproof at best. And maybe us being real human beings sitting in a real place in real time can talk about tomorrow. I think that could be fascinating. This is the thing, this is the thing that the internet doesn't allow us to do anymore, to have a conversation with each other, in front of each other. You'd be behind a wall, this is good, this wall is great, it has opened up many other worlds, but it has also trapped us. Sometimes, just going back to, I know you talk about a lot of instinctual contact with your work. And you kind of you go beyond, just one identity. You expand to other identities. You're like, I'm going to show you, you worked on, 100 Black men. And you made something that was like, it's not me, or whatever. But you were like,
1001.
Huh?
1001.
1001. You went that far. I'm like, yeah, I went 100, 1001. You went there and you extended what you hope freedom for you could be freedom for others. I saw when I read, most of your social studies work is always with that kind of, and I'm just a reader, just reading it, so I don't know what you're saying, but I know what I'm reading, and I know how I am poorly interpreting.
Yeah, hey, that matters some.
And, I find, and just the two of you with your massive experiences in a variety of fields, and, extend that experience even outside of the, United States and your particular professions, gives us a more, not just authentic, but just extended view. And this guy just rants. Rants very well,
You need that conversation.
but his rants are passionate, educated, articulate, and profound. And you make really cool sounds and late. But you make really great sounds to help others really confront the sounds they need to say.
I hope it did.
And that's just all of these things I mentioned are just many of the myriad of identities that you carry just from just one person's personal experience. And cheers.
Cheers.
Wait, are we on? Are we on?
Are we on? Yeah, I don't think we ever went off.
Oh God, we said all that shit in front of people. All right, cheers.
Cheers.
I want to ask everybody to try and come as close as they can comfortably to the table so I can get everybody in the frame.
I like to stay as the top.
Is someone sitting in that chair? Is someone sitting in that chair right there? Can we move that chair and everybody kind of move that way? For this hard, I've been trying to get everybody in, and
I'm just going to be the hand, like Dr. Claw.
that actually works out cool.
And I'm going to now do my Dr. Claw.
Cool, yeah. Just slide up as much as you can towards the top so I can capture everybody in there.
Hey, what's up? All right, are you downstairs?
Cool.
Okay, all right, Meg is coming to look for you. Okay, all right, bye.
Man, I got all the heads now.
Now everyone else knows. I just wanted to do the Dr. Claw thing, so no one sees me, but everyone can just hear his voice. So, I'm just waiting for our next guest to join us in our, table of doom.
I want this off.
True.
Say, why is that?
Yeah,
That's our other guest.
Hey, working your lap.
Yes.
We'll need this.
If
I
it's,
could awkwardly have this on my
if it's awkward, I'm sorry, but
lap.
it's,
It's okay.
I was gonna try to get it on the surface for you.
Just hope, here.
That's why I do want it on the surface. The last person coming in is mine this time.
The last person. Okay, it's fine this time. This is good.
Hey, hello.
Sorry, I was running late.
Glad you're here.
Join us at the table of doom.
Somehow you was weird.
Right, just that word. Or put your laptop there. Okay, is that weird? No.
Okay.
What's
going on here? It's so early. All right. Yeah. Like if you want me to give Lewis somebody. All right, right. It's laying out the invite. Okay.
Mhm.
Make sure that what is in there.
Yeah, on that side,
More people at the table?
Oh, no, I'm not.
All right.
Sure you don't.
Yeah, it's a big table. There you go.
We had it.
This is how we do it on C-SPAN. All right, well, being that the audience can, or whatever, whoever is out there watching us cannot see what's on this screen, I'm just gonna say what's on this screen. Or I'm gonna listen.
Give me one of these, you don't need.
Take this one.
Let's try it. That's what my screen is doing here.
Oh, there it is. Got it. All right. So what is ZQ287? ZQ287 is ontological mechanics. We are a think tank invested in the evolution of human thought. We are a publishing operation dedicating to transforming the imaginative landscape of society. So that sounds like some very vague and big shit there, people, but ride with me. So what do we mean by killing the future? Eurocentric and corporate interests have conscripted us in a future that does not recognize our diversity or our narratives. That is, the future we must kill. In order for a vibrant and realistic future to thrive, it must recognize all of our narratives. So, we have, we go into like, what is identity, culture. So these are some of the subjects that we are going to like, play with today, more likely. Identity politics is a relatively recent, roughly post-colonial method of recapturing original narratives as well as specific narratives of oppression of forced erasers. It was a necessary concept coined by the Combahee River Collective, a group of radical Black feminists in the 70s. ZQ287 hypothesizes, however, that identity culture is an outcome of identity politics. Identity culture is the propensity for different tribes, groups, etc., to stratify and segregate of their own accord. This behavior is accompanied by the tendency to police the speech of those who don't belong within the group, as well as to deny legitimacies to any efforts at integrating opinions from outsiders. When what we want to hopefully come to what we want to hopefully come to is, where is the middle ground between the two? Can we create a future in which we lift up our voices, our narratives, and a collaborative imagination? Our contributors. Anwan Mance is an artist and illustrator and a professor of African American literature at Mills College in Oakland, California. Naomi Brown, artist, Oakland, based futurist working in the media painting installation. Wave your hands. Manju Menon grew up in India and Zambia and is a writer in San Francisco. Sample work. Would you like to read that for us?
Particularly.
Okay. I would like to have one. All right, fine. Would y'all like for it to be read?
You have a great voice, Alan.
Okay. We women did not talk much at Singer Ward, and especially not at breakfast. We would get our baskets and then sit away from each other. The minders walked among us sometimes. They didn't eat with us, but stood by the side and watched. I spotted the new one right away, the one with olive skin and white hair. I got 3 good looks before I knew, and then I breathed in and out like they told us to find that off switch. Anand Baida. I'm hoping to the heavens I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Anand is a professor of philosophy and director of Center for Comparative Philosophy at San Jose State University. Where his sample works, first of all, we have to wave, Manju. Manju, please wave. We got the waving part. Whereas facts about what is actual are facts about how things are. Facts about modality, what is possible, necessary, or impossible, are facts about how things could, must, or could not have been. For example, while there are in fact 11 players on a soccer team, they could have been 13. So there couldn't have been 0. The first of these is a fact and what is actual. The second is a fact about what was possible, and the third is a fact about what is impossible. Humans are often disposed to consider, make, and evaluate judgment about what is possible and necessary, such as when we are motivated to make. Wait, is there more?
Should be, okay.
Mm.
Do you remember the last?
No, I don't.
No.
I just like that.
No. Wait. Did you help me with this one?
Yeah, something.
Shelton. I didn't want to just be like, is a hospice music therapist and a musician who's interested in collaborative songwriting. And here's a link to her ongoing work. Can we go there? Can we go there?
I think maybe because it's from a USB, it may not let us.
We'll
But which-
We don't have to go.
We can go there. We're going to end on that.
You could go there, but.
We will go there.
There's always time to go there.
You can tell us about how possible it is, or impossible,
Yes.
or moderately possible.
All right, we got Stephen Bramble. He is a novelist of fiction included Grid City Overload, Disposable Thoughts, with a body of work examining political, sociological, economic, cultural, and scientific issues of the contemporary world, attempting to explain and theorize with a philosophy demanding and proactive style. And she keeps her eyes on the screen, the menthol vapor filling her chest like 2 symmetrical zones of expanding cynicism. She's fleeing, conceptualizes herself as redacted text. That's what she feels like. Anyway, an incriminating fact padlocked behind a black bar. Not something invisible, but something hidden, forcibly. Time spent in the fucking place tended to resemble, even exaggerate the kind of slow motion agony life had become. Wave. More Muppet waves. Muppet waves. Muppet waves. Thank you. Loosen up. Alan Clark, your friendly neighborhood supervillain, graphic novelist, futurist, ontological machinist. You help make it. Well, the machinist part.
We're mechanicists.
We're mechanicists. I'm gonna wave my hand, wave hand, G hand, that's my hand. And Meg Hyers is a novelist and the founder of Creative Momentum, where she reads tarot cards to help artists, writers, performers, and academics unlock creative blocks, deepen their inspiration, and finish their projects. A flock of birds. Sample for work is a flock of birds slide overhead, their shadows crisp along dirt and over blueberry, the lion's back. He looks up, bored, but also curious, also vulnerable. It's that helpless look he makes when he's observing motion. His forehead crumpled into something like worry. Soft worry is Blueberry's weapon. He makes his loneliness and curiosity in order to saturate his sight with the landscape and feel in his body where his prey moves and why. What direction its next turn will be. Blueberry makes himself vulnerable like his prey, because he is vulnerable, like dissolves, like. Wait. And Camille, Jahi.
Come on.
Come on, sorry. I'm sorry, I'm getting liquids.
Good.
So Kamal is multi-talented. He is manning the camera today. We wanted to give you a little sample of his music, which we'll do, I guess, later when we do Shadow's music as well.
Thank you very much for your abilities in using technology, guys. We'll
Good.
never understand.
It's not as hard as it looks. I will never know how to draw as good as you do unless you teach me.
I'm going to yell at that machine
Okay.
over and over and
I'm
over.
going to yell at my pencil over and over again.
All right. Thank you all for joining us. And I will begin our questions of the day. And I shall start off with a question that I shall share with every member of this table. And I shall start with you. Yay. You just happened to be right there. You could have been. But you took up that seat.
Intentionally.
What does identity mean to your art, body politics, and cultural body?
I think while I'm doing the project, at first I was thinking to see more clearly of an identity, which for me is someone who grew up in a Chinese culture, but then lived in America for 10 years. And then I feel like there's the two different identities. They're very confusing for me personally. So the original intention for my project was to explore how other people deal with that. So I guess what does it mean to my art is my motivation, actually, to explore it, to get clarification. Although at this point, I don't know if it exists for me, really. Yeah.
Can you maybe give me maybe a little bit more about that? That seems something that you touched on something that I feel like I just wanted.
I'm at a very confusing stage, I feel like, at my art too. Maybe it's just the nature of it, because I collaborate songs with friends, Chinese friends I have. So it's very individual. It's a lot about their personal experience, rather than, I don't feel I have enough of the information to pull it together and say, this is identity. It's too big of a word for me for now. Yeah, but it's definitely what in the beginning motivated me to start.
I like this word exploration. That's something that when you say that's something that it is a motivation, it's something I want to hopefully we can get back to, because I think that's very important to like start off with, because this is kind of an exploration. So thank you on that one, and I'll pass the same question to you if I could.
In terms of my art, I would say body politics and cultural body. I think identity is important. I think it's at the core, but I don't think it is necessarily a boundary. And so when you were talking, I was thinking about, well, what does that question mean to me? I feel very grounded in my identity as African American, but I also feel like in some ways I create my art for me to answer my own questions about what it means to be Black in this contemporary moment. But I also feel that almost, not by osmosis, but because I'm doing art from the perspective of a Black person with a multiplicity of identities, that it's important also for the work to be out there. I almost feel like because of my identity, I have a responsibility to create a body of work that shows how I'm experiencing the world, and what's important and what has value to me, because I think one of the things we need at this particular moment is for people to share their point of view. And so for me, art becomes a way of kind of thinking about my identity and creating work that puts my point of view out into the world.
I like when you describe this multiplicity of identity, but also this kind of, I feel like you're making a lexicon, a vocabulary for others to maybe experience through your work, their feelings that they don't have a vocabulary for.
Yeah. I could see that. I mean, I will just say when I've done shows of my 1001 Black Men in particular, but also my comics about Black identity and queer identity and gender, it's always interesting to see other people feel like, say, oh, I feel like I'm seen with 1001 Black Men. What's really been important to me is when Black men come up to me and say, oh, I feel like this is actually me. This is Black maleness that I can actually relate to. This is what I see when I'm in the world. And I think that's really important. And then the colors, for example, is a metaphor for the diversity of Black men. And then in my comics that are very much about the intersection of Blackness, queerness, and being a nerd, I love when people pick up and say, hey, this is just like my brother, or this is me, or they just have that look that says, oh yeah. So, some kind of visual language in particular for experiences that aren't necessarily accounted for in mainstream representations.
I got to have an opportunity to witnessing fans of your work at a coffee shop as they were reading it, like looking up to them, and I got to talk to them. And they expressed this same love, like vulnerability, but the vocabulary that they found through your work. So no, that was, yeah. So with that in mind, I'm just taking notes here. Going to go back a lot of things here. This is very good stuff here. Thank you. Matthew, Mr. Bramble.
I think the way that I think about identity is probably or at least the way I deal with it in my writing is, a lot of it I think is, so many people do get locked into their identity by their body politic, by their cultural body that surrounds them. And there's a lot of normativity, especially that happens in the US. Maybe not here in Oakland, but definitely in other places. And there's a lot of pressure to conform. And I think that some of my narratives they're not so focused on characterization, but maybe like dissolving a particular identity that you might latch onto instinctually and kind of get you to start thinking in broader terms about who you are, how you relate to other people outside of sort of stilted definitions that we have for ourselves and one another. As important as they are, not to say that they're not important, but I think some of the deeper stuff that I deal with surrounding identity is trying to decide whether you really have one or not. And if you do, what are you dredging up out of it, and what's worth keeping, and what seems like it's no different from the person sitting next to you or across from you.
So this dissolving instinct, like I feel like there's this dissolving of instinctual ID. Is this like being replaced with, do you think, are you saying, are they being replaced by something that is constructed by its present people and against this instinctual ID? Can you go a little more detail about that one?
Well, your own, I guess what I'm trying to say is like, you're who you are. You wake up into consciousness in the world and your parents tell you, this is who you are, this is where you come from. These are the values that we ascribe to. Whether it's at, you know, some people get that drilled into them very explicitly. Other people, it's just you absorb it according to your mode of life, the way that people live. And to me, I think you have to wave away some of that, like almost as if it were propaganda, and try to figure out the ways that we're all the same and the way that really, you know, delineate where we're the same and where we're different. And that's sort of like a radical, it's like a thought exercise in trying to either think more communally or think more individualistically. Trying to, you know, really get in there and see where it's helpful to think on a more communal basis. And sometimes that's painful. You know, it's painful for us to dissolve our own identity and say, we don't really matter that much in this context. We're just another person. Or to say, no, I actually do have something to say now. There's, you know, I have something to contribute here. My own perspective is worth it for you to listen to. So that kind of thing, trying to like deconstruct it a little bit and flatten it out and then build it up as you see fit as a person.
Most of your novels kind of looks at kind of deconstructing something. Like each of your books have come from the perspective of deconstructing something. And I feel like, and we're going to go back to this, like many of these other things, is like, dude, like deconstructing yourself through your novels, like your works. Are you working through something personal that most of us as authors and artists do? Like we work through our own personal weights and problems and labors through this labor of work. And, you know, as you were mentioning earlier, that, you know, the confusing like elements of songs and trying to like, you know, gather enough information to construct, weave together something that can become, like, I think it's like you're weaving together that exploration. And, you know, in your, you know, stories, you're weaving together vocabulary for people who are, you know, learning to find out what is the word that I feel, you know. And, you know, as I go to, as mentioning this, I want to go to our next person, and I want Ms. Brown, you could,
with the mouse.
Sure, you know, it's funny, I was just listening to what you were talking about, and a little bit you're questioning the ideas, if you were asking if some of the stuff came from personal narratives, or how you insert yourself into the story. And I think, for me, I feel like that for artists, and or I would say art that I'm really moved a lot by, I feel like I noticed that artists are implicit. So they're somehow, whether it's a self-portrait or they're painting themselves into a scene, or they're filming themselves into a scene, or writing themselves into something, it's a way to make oneself implicit. So it's also kind of creating a space where I'm not above my audience. We're actually kind of on the same place. We're exploring kind of the same idea. So we're kind of going through an element of it together like that. But I think in terms of this idea of the role that I think that identity kind of plays in terms of the way that I make art, I think a lot about, with me, since again I'm a visual artist, I think a lot about how the black body, the term even the black body is used a lot, and try to push against that because it seems like it becomes a very reductive kind of way of describing African Americans. And so, in part of my project and what I do is try to add
levels of eccentricity and over detailing and kind of hyper exaggerated characters. I do all this to almost to create the dialogue and conversation that there are these many different layers, like actually to African Americans or people of the African diaspora, and to try to kind of counteract that, which I see that reductive quality I see in mass media, and also and going about it also and trying to figure out how to also rupture that, right? Some of those things that I see in mass media is to create new narratives, the idea of inserting newer ones that go against or ones that are different than what we see in the Western canon. So presenting up other information, that being kind of the newer narrative. You know, these pieces that we're starting to find, whether they're personal journals of peoples who come from cultures of ethnic groups that we thought were traveling in certain periods of time, but had freedom that we were only realizing because of their journals now. Changing certain stories, like looking back at history, you know, personal family histories as well as other iconic figures, but examine that. That's stuff that I feel like that's how my art is influenced very heavily in constructing ideas about identity. And because it seems like it's also complicated. You're talking a little bit about, I think, with your own work, and that there's multiple kinds of identities. You were saying it's Black, queer, there's all these, and further layers even beyond that, right? We're all parts of different societies, secret clubs, whatever. And I think that becomes really important, like seeing that there's this, again, that multiplicity, that there's all these different layers. You know, that's what kind of, that starts to kind of create the identity, that it's not one thing. You know, and I remember I saw a piece that an artist created out of Harlem that was really dope. It was a neon piece. And it was just a simple flip of two words, me and we. So me was on top and then we was on bottom. And sometimes I think about being part of the African diaspora like that. It's like it's about my own individual personal expression, but then there's also that expression and all that is tempered by an aesthetic choices or tempered by the aspect that I'm part of this other group, right? So the we and the me they slip and slide between one another very porously.
Yeah, I noticed that with most of your work as well. It's like there's this kind of room that you try to make to say you can make your own thing. That you always gave that space is that you can make your own thing. You can Frankenstein your own thing in a lot of ways, right? I see that kind of there's strange cannibalization that occurs that we do culturally, and then we Frankenstein together. I feel like as I see some like the early parts when I saw with your narrative storytelling.
Yeah, it's funny. Cannibalizing is a way to think about it's a good way. There's an artist by the name of Julio Oidechica, Brazilian artist, and he talked a little bit about his philosophy about thinking about Brazilian culture, which again has so much heavy influence from not only the indigenous Indian people there, but also to the Africans that are brought there, is that this idea of having such an intense history, and it's so bogged down with all these elements of like racial stuff, and all these, colonialism, all these things. He suggested, why not eat that culture and create something new? Why not pull from other cultures? Why not find something new? And so that's, again, part of my own projects. Part of that, those are my interest in that. But it's kind of that idea, like cannibalizing the older story to make room for the newer one. Right? There's going to be remnants, of course, of the whole thing. It's like I have remnants of my meat over me. They're still around somewhere. I like that idea of consuming that old thing, creating that new thing.
Excellent. And even though you should introduce yourself.
I'm not an artist. At least not within our you, like, I'm just a regular person who's listening in. But I can say something about identity to me. When I think about identity, I don't think of an absolute kind of thing. I feel like it's a relative thing that kind of depends on your focus and what you value. And of course, what you focus and what you value is gonna change, like, depending on what state of life you're in. So I guess that's how I think of identity. Yeah.
No, I like that, the focus and value, which is it's essential, it's basic, but it is an absolute, that need to have these things be that shifting like it's a shapeshifter. Identity is a shapeshifter. It shifts and shapes to what new cells grow and what our new mindsets grow into.
Yeah, I feel like it's a two-way thing.
Mhm.
Like, of course, like you said, identity shapes the way that you behave or do things. But on the other side, it's sometimes the other side that's driven it. So it's kind of like a two-way kind of thing that constantly flowing between each other. Yeah, that's how I feel.
Thank you. Thank you. And being that you came in late, you have to introduce yourself.
Yeah. I'm Joshua. I'm a painter. In terms
Wave,
of
you have to do a wave. Muppet wave. Muppet wave.
In terms of identity and how it plays into my work,
Now, mind you, he is the person with the giant painting
Across the
that is
fucking
right outside, across the street.
yeah. In terms of my work and how identity plays in it, I don't consciously think about infusing all the ways I identify into my work. I'm more focused upon just creating an interesting window for myself to look into and then share that with other people, so I think sometimes people look at my work and they assume, that I'm speaking from a Black male perspective with my work, and I usually just shrug my shoulders and say, all right, I think just what you was talking about when it comes to identity, I see it as something that is, even within our own lifetimes, constantly shifting, but even if you think about outside of our lifetimes and throughout the human story, like transport this conversation 1,000 years ago and nobody's talking about Blackness. Nobody knows what a concept of Blackness is. People are just like, what? They can call themselves Black at some point? All right. So, and go 1,000 years before that, and it's even more different, So I think for me, I recognize.
This how temporary identity is.
Sure.
Yes.
Sure. But I recognize the extreme value of diversity, in conversations. I love it when, people see themselves or see somebody that they know, within my work, especially since, a lot of my work, I would say about 90% of my imagery is women, and most of those are women of color, So when it's not really an intended result, but when that happens, it warms me.
You and Juan have a similar kind of like two sides of the same angle. You are illustrating 1,001 Men.
Yeah.
And you
are.
you are
As you were talking, I was like,
and you are illustrating 90% of all your illustrations are women of color. So
you say men see themselves in your work and they come to you and I get the same thing from women. So it's interesting, people ask me why women all the time, I have a floating answer, I'd say the answer today, probably pertains to, I feel like when it comes to infusing emotional content into my work, it flows better through creating the eyes and form of a woman, like people are more likely to allow the lushness to wash over them, if it's a woman presenting, the lushness to them.
So you're creating a vehicle for that experience to,
Exactly.
wash over them, and that you're using this method of saying, well, image-wise, people are more calm when they see an image of a woman to allow this vulnerability to happen.
Not just more calm, but more more emotionally,
Vulnerable.
yeah, it's like, it's like, it's like a Hende Wiley, he utilizes the opposite of that. He does the same thing with lushness, and femininity, and has usually Black males, at the center of his pieces, and that's what sort of makes his work spicy, So, yeah, I like to, I don't know, that's one of the things that I like to use in my work, on top of science fiction, fantasy, and just general, diving into fantastical realms. So, yeah, that's how identity plays with my work, I would say.
This message.
Yeah, I think for me, identity does have something to do with narrative storytelling. I feel like I'm a storyteller, and there are stories that we tell ourselves about who we are, what our identities are, and then that obviously shifts from time to time. As you said, I mean, where you live can play such a major part. All of a sudden, I'm a person that lives in San Francisco versus I'm a person that lives in here. There's just those kind of minor details can make a difference on those kind of stories. And then there's a story that maybe that's imposed on you externally as well. So maybe as I'm walking down the street, I have a story of myself that might be very rich, detailed, and all these things. And somebody might look at me and have a very simple story about myself, who I am. So there are these sort of identities that maybe are imposed on us, and also identities that we have that are internal. And they may also sort of influence each other as we go through our lives. My work, I feel like I'm very interested in stories. I love the idea of just telling a really good story. And if that involves, well, it tends to involve people that I have known over the course of my life, and people that maybe I've even read about, or people that interest me in some way, and what their stories are like. I love to look at people and also wonder, imagine what their lives are like, and their identities are like, and sort of layer stories. So I guess that's.
No, I like where you were saying we were going at with, I guess the sentence comes to mind. Who we are is where we are. And I feel like you're express, like you are a different person where you are, because you have to adjust to the customs of the place that you are, and it may even change how you may find responses that you may not know you like or dislike. But I feel like where who you are is where you are. But you also go into deep, like your details, like the stories that you have for yourself. Now, are these stories like people have chests, like these little secret chests that they have? Is that kind of how you look at it? Like these stories are either they're secret, they're joys, they're is there something that?
Well, it could, partly, but it could also just be a story of who I tell myself I am.
Mm-hmm. Now tell me more about that.
For example, I am a person that grew up in India and Zambia. It's sort of like what you put in your little bio, or if you go a little bit deeper, maybe it's something else, who your friends are, who your parents are, what your relationships were like with them, or it could be some other things about success or failure that you hold important, or you think society is, society has placed value on you. So the stories that you tell about yourself to yourself could also make up an identity, and that could also shift from time to time. Sort of an internalized identity. Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect sense. I like that everyone has this public persona and they have this private persona. Maybe. Is that?
Yeah, but Yeah, there's a public persona. I was trying, I guess, make the distinction also of externalized identity that may be imposed on you by society, right? And it may be a very narrow kind of an identity versus a story that you tell yourself that, in fact, may be equally narrow, even worse, even more harsh. Yeah, right. It could be even more harsh, but it could most likely be a lot richer. But it's still a narrative, I think, in a story that can be shaped and shifted over time.
Thank you. I'm just scribbling notes.
Okay.
So I extend this now, same question to you.
Okay. I don't know. I mean, I'm not really an artist also, so I don't know if I should be like talking about how it influences my art. But I think there's a theme that resonates really well with what everyone's saying. It's also really relevant given the title of your group as Ontological Mechanics. So if I may start by saying something about that.
Please.
So like ontology is like a really important central part of life philosophy, and its core topic is existence. And the second one right after that is identity. The core topic of ontology is existence and identity. And in fact, the central question is what exists? That's the central question of ontology. And the question that helps you answer that is, what are the conditions for identity for saying something exists? That's like, I thought it was really cool that you started with this question. I know this is like pre-planned, Alan, but it beautifully works out. It's like the perfect unfolding of, well, what would an ontological mechanic do? Well, an ontological mechanic might just figure out, what identity is. So it's very cool. So I couldn't resist the comment. That component of the title, ontological mechanics.
Thank you. We try hard to.
So in that respect, I think. Now to get a little bit towards. So I do think that my own personal identity in a lot of the ways that Manju described influences my work, be it artistic or not, because as a philosopher who's trying to bring more awareness to the philosophy that comes from cultures outside of the Eurocentric model, my goal primarily is to facilitate a platform where people can present those philosophies authentically in their own voice without cultural appropriation, and allow for other communities and philosophers from different traditions to engage with one another in a kind of conversation where they feel like there isn't only one central backdrop Eurocentric model which they have to respond to. So it's a way of communicating across these boundaries. So in that sense, I'm personally very much influenced by that as someone who's trained very much in a very Eurocentric model, but also deeply respects philosophies from different traditions and so on. So it affects my work, even though it's not artistic, in that way. So then one last thing I'd like to say, I think it's really interesting when we do talk about identity to to just be aware of the fact that this thing, identity, is pretty much thematized in every philosophical culture that I've explored. And we find that there are two distinctions that came up pretty much in everyone's commentary about it, which is either you're someone who thinks that identity makes sense in the independent voice. There is a thing such that it has an identity, and that thing is a thing that holds the identity. And the other voice, which says the interdependent voice. There is no thing that is such that it holds the identity, rather everything is in an interdependent relation. I can find this contrast between Hindus and Buddhists, between David Hume and Christian theology. I can find it in a whole bunch of different places. And it pretty much seems like it came up in one way or another with almost everyone's commentary. It's almost impossible to not find yourself confronting that sort of thing. And so one of your comments that was really interesting was this idea of like, do I have an identity that's in part individuated by geography, by spatial location? And in other cultures, we find that it's not spatiality that's important, but it's temporality. It's a phase state dimension. What part of your life are you at in a stage of your life that determines how you sort the relevant factors of your identity? Not the geography, but the temporality. But then in other cultures, we might see that the location is the central factor of individuation, and temporality is the second thing that comes about. So it's really just, so I just think that's cool. Like, I mean, ontological mechanics ought to be talking about identity in the beginning.
But you mentioned a very interesting space and time.
Yeah.
Like how space and time
Yeah, can structure different.
constructs everything.
Yeah.
And could you maybe dance around that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I think it's, well, there's lots of different ways in which, so ontology itself has so many different ways in which it's been developed. Like if you think about the temporal aspect and you're really interested in that, you can see, like, for example, the difference between a substance ontology and a process ontology. So you can find process ontology in William James and in Buddhism. And basically the idea is that there's nothing that is independently existing at any given time. Everything's a process that's unfolding. And that takes the notion of temporality very seriously. It says that the time individuation factor is constitutive of what things are, be they cups or persons. And so that's a very different thing than someone who's like a very hardcore substance ontology person is like, no, there's this time thing that is later on top of that. Right? And so when we conceive of ourselves, implicitly, I think we find ourselves speaking in, you could probably do it laterally like this. You can say, we find ourselves at times speaking about our own identity implicitly through our own understanding of what an identity is, right? So you have like a pre-theoretic philosophical frame of what I think identity speak is, and then when I talk and construct the way in which I think I'm going to speak about identity, we speak through that lens implicitly, whether or not we've explicitly ever thought about our own ontological commitments of what we think identity is. So for example, many cultures, when they speak about their identities, will speak in a very process speech, even though they haven't explicitly gone out writing out everything. And that's just an interesting thing to uncover. So so go ontological mechanics.
Yeah. Or acronym O. And this.
I think the identity stuff that tends to really resonate with my readers that I write about is like the mother-daughter stuff. And even if femininity isn't being talked about directly in that, it's just the intensity of like, you're supposed to copy you and you're supposed to live through you, and this is like the intensity of relationship that ensues. But I'm also writing about identity, like white identity, and being, born into an identity that is an oppressor identity, and what, how do I work with that in the art? And I read about lions. That was the piece that you saw. And I think one of the things that and like the protagonist of my novel really identifies with black holes because there's like a dissolving that is trying to take place through like really intense questioning at points. I think, there's like this rhetorical question. It's like, how can white people be so like stupid or awful or whatever? And it's like always asked rhetorically. And I like take that question. I'm like, no, like I want why? Why is it? And that's what a lot of what the book is about. And so in lieu of embracing a white identity, there's kind of embracing like a black hole dissolving dissolution identity, which I think like an artist identity, like we all have a degree of that, of like, I'm gonna dissolve something. Like I'm gonna go into the abyss where I can't see anything and I'm gonna see what happens out there. So that's what I'm working on.
I like this kind of like weird mother-daughter living through each other kind of thing, like this kind of half-ass immortality. Can you express this feeling of having your identity was like the identity that you may have been an identity of someone else, and then like it was placed on you, so that you must now carry this identity further, like carrying an identity that is not necessarily inherently yours, but you inherit. Can you tell me more about this inheritance of an identity?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it has a lot to do with loyalty. And the character, like as far as mother-daughter, like femininity, I think the character in my book inherits a rejection of femininity. and feels obligated and loyal to carry that out. And so there's a relationship of being, you know, how the mother sees, like the daughter's perception of how the mother sees her, but the daughter kind of looking out, you know, into the world and being like, oh, I kind of actually want to be like that, but that would be a betrayal of what I'm supposed to be embodying.
Like this inheritance thing. This is we're going to get back to this inheriting a identity and that loyalty factor that comes along with it. There's something interesting with loyalty culturally. There's a cultural loyalty I feel like we all have to carry on. Like out of us, like for example, black and white are artificial constructs. All of us in this room carry this identity, even though we knew this was an identity meant to separate us. But we still carry this identity with pride. And there's a weird thing that I want to maybe investigate further, maybe down the line, of why do we carry the oppressor's identity? Even those who are white, who are like, they're poor, they suffer the same ailments in a lot of ways. They just have their own flavor of ailments that they suffer from. But they're still separated by these artificial constructs that were created in purpose to separate us. And we hold on to them because we have developed culture inside them. Like we feel, even though our oppressor offered us, like, this is who you are, we made it something more than it was before. We made it something. We didn't leave it to be this kind of this rotted thing. We gave it life. We allowed it to be struck with lightning. You know, we pulled off a Mary Shelley in here. And so I'm going to want to go jump into the next question because I feel that we have addressed all three of the original questions up on the board, and I'm just going to move forward in time. Question everyone has amazing answers, so I'm going to go down across the board. I will ask if everyone can minimize their answers in the sake of time. I want everyone's answers though, so everyone will answer. Where do you think, being a group first, where do you think art is going in terms of who consumes it and who gets to make it?
Art, you mean visual art or all kinds?
All kinds.
I'm not understanding where this question comes from because I feel like it's really free. Everyone can consume it and everyone can make it. I
guess the question emerges from, as people that create art, in one regard to the other, we believe our art to be universal. But we find that our art doesn't have or carry that universality that we think in its original ethics. We sell our art to people who have money. Our art goes to people who can afford it. So our art doesn't necessarily have it for us to survive, for us to live in a world that's built, designed in this capitalist model or in any model. Our work goes to those who can afford it. Our art is not given to the poor, unfortunately. Our work is not given to destitute. Our work goes into places where we sell them for profit so we can survive.
Oh, I see.
So like there's this shattering understanding of what does that mean when we say art is universal, but our practice is commercial.
I see it. I can't say much for art, visual art, because I'm not in that field, but in music, as much as I know, the entertainment business has been, what's the word, corporatizing the whole music industry, but I was doing a little bit of research and I saw a lot of independent, how can I say this, independent platform for musicians where you can just upload your music and you actually get money when people follow and listen to your music. And yes, the industry is very much money driven and capitalized, but there is also, I feel like there's also a lot of space for people to break free, to be free. If you don't want to follow that model, there is a way to do it. It's just that if you do it the other way, you don't get a lot of money back right away. When you don't earn a lot right away. But it's yeah, I don't even know if that's enough to really earn a living by posting your music online. I don't know about that, but at least that's something hopeful for me to see. And also, I don't know in America, but in China, there are so many online radio platforms. They call it radio, but it's really just platforms and media apps that you can use on your phone. And so many people has used that media platform to be their own, to have their own station. And you can post anything there. You can post a podcast, you can post music, you can post rap, you can read books, and people will follow and people listen to that. And I guess if you accumulate to a certain amount of followers, you earn something. So I feel like
Just, I want to just, I'm short on time, but I want to ask you this specific question specific to your work in hospice. Because those are, because people like you make art for that. You're treating.
I do therapy.
You do therapy with that, but you use art as a means to music to, and these are the people that are consuming that. Like, how do you explain that method if you can? That these are the people that are consuming your creations in a therapeutic sense.
They're not consuming my creation. They're consuming the service, which is more therapy focused, just using music as an element. So let's say instead of using morphine or any painkillers, they use maybe an hour of music therapy to be distracted from pain or to relieve emotional pain. So I wouldn't say that's artwork per se.
Sometimes many people think art is healing,
What does
modality.
happen occasionally is that I write songs with my patients and their families. I don't feel like they're consuming it though, because I feel like we're co-collaborating the song together. So in a way, they are the owner of the piece too. I'm just facilitating them to make their music or their song. A lot of the times they make the lyrics. Sometimes they make the melody too. So yeah, they're the owner of the artwork too.
So okay, we're going to get back to that one.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's, I'm just going to put the stars now. And if you can, Ms. Aloma.
Yes, I will. I will say that I think art is going in some ways many different directions. I think that when you think of the arts as a whole, this is because of innovations in technology. I mean, this is a great moment for individuals and people who are creating non-mainstream work to be seen and to have their work out there. Whether it's creating music and uploading it, creating films and uploading it, or the way that you can now do so much layout and really great high quality production of comics, indie comics and zines. So I don't know if there's a single zine fest today that, at least in major cities, it doesn't have to curate their entrance, because there's so many people who are making independent comics or art or poetry magazines, and the SF Zine Fest, the LA Zine Fest, Long Beach Zine Fest are so swamped with people who are making their stuff that they have to take a moment and choose 250 people out of all that group. And so it's to me, as we become more digital, and then huge groups of people show up to buy this analog product. And so I think that people are, I would say that people are smarter consumers of culture, and they know that they're being fed a corporate product. And some people with a lot of consciousness will say, I'm just going to settle in for the ride, and I'm going to watch live action Beauty and the Beast. But then they're also very cognizant of the fact that, I actually want to hear what rappers are creating when they don't have all of the recording, industry behind them. What are they making? And so I'm pleased to be here at this moment when there are savvy consumers of art who also, some ways, I wouldn't call it the democratization of technology, but it's widely accessible, can kind of do that thing they call long tail economics and find these niche products that the gatekeepers would not have allowed these things to be produced. And so I think there's gonna be more of that. I think we see, major television stations, recording industries, the center cannot hold, I don't think, for another 30 years with all of these people being able to powerfully create independent work and get it out globally.
I like this idea of smarter consumer culture. I think you're right about, I feel like right now, markets of artists visually, and even both music through visuals, through book writing, the technology has become available to everyone and can be easily accessible to make competitive looking products, which then definitely shifts the playing field. And knowing that, as everyone is like, digital has been around for a while, yet no one has this. Trees feel natural and they feel good in your hand. And having a machine in your hand heat up and slowly give you cancer, it's not something anyone wants to have. Trees don't give you cancer. Computers give you cancer. And there's something like, I feel that our bodies, when we hold it, we know it. And like with paper, but even though paper's getting, the production of paper, like in the 70s, the 60s, the comic movement that emerged out of there, when people were making more independent comics, and they changed up with an X at the end, like really changed, like who else can play in this field? It can't just be that. In the 80s, a whole merge, 90s, and they just keep moving on in that angle, and just the consumer hopefully will know better because it will want better.
Right.
And that's usually how culture moves. It's like consumers will be aware of a culture because they see something that interests them and they buy it. Yeah. So
I'll just keep it brief because I'm not sure that I have any really profound reflections on this, but I do see it as like there are two kind of like competing movements. There's big mass media, which does seem to be like it's going through a bit of a revolution as far as like who gets access especially in terms of like identity politics, racially, and like different sexualities, different stories being told. But it's also really shrinking fast into like a very few companies. And then there's also the more democratized movement, which is just like the infinite fracturing of like, now you can watch your friend do whatever he's doing on YouTube or whatever. Like, there's a million different ways to self-publish and to self-promote, blah. But I do think that you have, like, as far as the second part of the question of who consumes it, it's important to remember that like a lot of the mass media artwork does hold sway over the democratized version of it. And just because we live here in California, I mean, it's like one of the crown jewels of this country. There's a lot of culture that happens here. There's a lot of access to even the internet and places where these democratized forms exist. Elsewhere, it's harder to gain access to that kind of thing. And I think it's just important to realize that like democratization doesn't necessarily mean organization or something that's going to be easy for people to consume and to create a narrative out of. And I think that it's really important to have these structures where people can be like, okay, I see, this is HarperCollins or this is Focus Features, and I have an idea of what kind of stories they're going to tell and whether I can even trust them or not. So you just send people out into like nowheresville, because like it's not as if YouTube is not a corporate platform and that they don't, you don't have to pander to people to get seen and stuff. So I think, I'm not sure if I can place a real value on how one is affecting the other. We see those consequences happening, but I'm not really sure which side is winning. I think it's hard to say at this point whether it's bleaker or more optimistic. You could probably make an argument for either at the moment.
And which argument do you feel is inherently more plausible to occur?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know if I have, I think either could be, but I think at least in a personal way, I'm trying to, organize and make sure that there are smaller, that like a lot of what we do is like going against the literary establishment and the ways that we see, comic labels and literary labels as being cloistered and uncreative and restricting access to people. But also we're not just like throwing spaghetti against the wall and just, seeing whatever, we're trying to make some sort of organized, concerted effort to say, no, we can actually organize. We don't just need chaos. We can actually do this in an orderly fashion without it all crumbling beneath us. The people in control of their own artwork can be smart about it and can sustain it.
All right. You may.
How's it going, man?
Howdy.
Good.
Hey, just some water.
I'm good. I was thinking about, actually wrote down something. Part of me kind of thinks a little bit of an article I read that was an article about industrial design, and it talked a little bit about the history of the arts and the reality that art and technology actually really very terribly combined very early on in its construction, and then it just kind of separated like many disciplines for study in college or whatever, for whatever reason to categorize things. But one thing that it talked about was that when technology is really good, it integrates into society in a way that it's actually becomes somewhat seamless. And I think in a lot of ways that's where we are a little bit now. There's elements of that now. But where I see art kind of going though is more blending of art and technology, because I kind of feel like that's what we also see innovation can happen when those two things start to overlap. But also thinking about culture as technology. So it's not just tech, like high tech, like we're the Silicon Valley here in California, but it's not that. It's also that culture. I think that's a little bit like what you were discussing too, things outside the Western canon, just bringing in other thoughts that are different from that. I think that makes such a huge difference already. It changes the whole geography of what we consider a playing field. Or even pulling from different modes of thought that are outside the Western canon to create something new, that possibility. So I feel like for me, that's where art is going, is that blending of technology and it becoming really even more seamless. I mean, I think like I said, it's like you see it in ergonomics, like these chairs, they're great. We didn't even think about how great they feel until you go and sit into crappy McDonald's. Those are terribly designed. but then you're aware, but see what I mean? But then you're aware of design, and then you're aware of the art, whereas like now it's like it's seamless. It's like it's all beautiful, it's good. I'm not even thinking about it. So it becomes like that, like you're a fish in water and you don't think about it, But hopefully with that, when that moment occurs though, that there are ruptures and moments and spaces that are public that allow for just expressive moments with that art and technology. So it's not just, it's for a purpose, it's for X, Y, Z, it's for to move me from point A to point B, but that it's purely for creative thought, for exploration.
So you're pretty much kind of saying that as they were together in the beginning, they're coming back together in the end.
Yeah.
And, this separation of the two and this articulation to like, divide them and to analyze them for its, in its, I guess, ideal purity state is no longer functional. And we're going back to its original state of it being one seamless, natural kind of thing where design, art, technology, and function kind of like merges together.
So you see it in, I think, lots of explorations of
it's funny in physics, it's like, things we talk about metaphysics, but the reality is like a lot of explorations that are in physics are going back to metaphysics. They're looking at these really abstract ways of thinking that we had left to the side long ago. It's weird, that doesn't make any sense. Like someone having an aura or an energy field, whereas like with special equipment now, we could read someone's actual magnetic field. Right? It's there. You just needed the right lens. And someone told you that many hundreds of years ago in human history. So that's interesting to me, that folding back. So again, we move forward, but then we're folding back, and technology allows some of those explorations.
I want to get back to something that you're leaving off on, the kind of the denial of when someone else's cultural technology, and then because it doesn't read it directly to your current scientific metric, so you get the right lens and you observe the right stimuli, the right field, and all of a sudden, bada bing, bada boom, oh, look what we discovered. It's like, no, the cultural technology, as you mentioned, existed prior to our rediscovery of this event.
We discovered different modes of thought coming through back doors of things. Clearly, we talk about elements that we see Hinduism and Buddhism. You could see in Candomblé, and Voodoo, these certain ideas about energy. They're there. But each culture enters it through a different door. Socrates chose this door, but then there's another door that someone else chose. Stop it there.
I guess I'm gonna think of this question not from the angle of what's impacting the art, but within the art itself. Where do you think art is going? I do feel like the consumer and the producer of art kind of feed each other to the point that I almost feel like the art is going to a segmented place where, like, personally, I tend to consume art where I resonate with it. That's what I mean by I feel like the consumer and the producer of it are feeding each other. So, like, for example, if I'm interested in certain kind of energy that gets delivered from an art, I tend to be drawn to it. I tend to consume it in a way that I just feel like it's almost going in somewhere segmented.
Do you think that relationship could become problematic because it's kind of it becomes symbiotic it could be symbiotic in a good way, but could that symbiosis could stagnate the artist's ability to expand beyond an immediate funnel of like, I know I make this art this person buys. If I make more of this art, more people will buy it. But that person who continues to make only that kind of art avoids making an entire avenue of art that would have been possible if perhaps this, exchange wasn't so accessible.
I do feel like it's a personal choice. I feel like it kind of goes back to the identity thing that we discussed. It depends on what you value and what you focus on. If your focus is on making money, then yeah, probably that's what you should do. But if your focus is on exploring or like trying to satisfy some parts in you and in your audiences, then they will do something differently.
Good, thank you. This is, again, great answers. And we haven't gotten to the other end of the table, so thank you.
Yeah, in terms of where I think art is going.
Who's consuming your art? Because you are out there literally on the wall right outside. And like, I really am very curious to what your answer is to this. Like, as a person who is making that.
Yeah, I actually, believe more along the first, the first answer to the question that everybody can consume it, meaning, we're in a day and age, like the internet is an amazing contraption, and it isn't just people in California that have it. It's like people so many people have access, to look at my work. I can sit in a cafe, make a drawing, and suddenly have access to millions of minds, to interact with it and respond to it. And yeah, I think anybody and everybody, you know, can go and create, you know. So when it comes to, you know, because I know we're tumbling into the other two questions, you know, sort of.
I think we're kind of all answering these questions
Yeah.
in clumps. Like one of them kind of brings up the answers that the other will allow. Like, oh, this one's the doorway. Here comes the flood.
Yeah. I tend to lean more towards, you know, the optimistic. You know, I have lots of positive energy about the age that we live in. You know, especially if we sit and imagine what it was like again 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
It was shitty then.
Reality, you know, it was just. It was really terrible. It was terrible.
It was the whole terrible. You know, like me trying to paint 1,000 years ago, it's not a thing.
How much animal blood do you have?
Exactly. Yeah. I'd be turning over dirt in the field, trying to, you know, thinking about doing some painting. You know, but it's more likely I'd be turning over dirt in the field because that's what my father was. You know? So in terms of making art and trying to communicate my work to as many people as possible, you know, I certainly believe that I'm I appeared in the best time that I could appear, based upon what I know of the past. Who knows about the future? And yeah, I feel like the thought process is more, you know, again, with the internet being what it is, you know, and the availability to your own market, you know, it's less about coming up. It's important to come up with a style, but it's more important to think about how your work provides value. You know, get creative on your products. You know, like she was talking about utilizing her work as therapy. You know, and that's just like, oh, you know, like this therapeutic interaction between artist and patient. You know, that's something that everybody, you know, probably hasn't even considered, but has access to that possibility. That was in there. Yeah, you know. So thinking about the products that you know, as you're sitting there scribbling on a paper, you know, or composing notes, you know, like coming up with how, you know, how to provide value, i.e. how to make lives of other human beings better with your work, you know, and just dive into that, you know. And definitely, like early on in a career, you don't want to get too deep into that. You have to start believing. You have to be selfish with it first. You have to get to a point of developing a style, you know, whether, you know, the first, you know, I think we probably had this conversation numerous times. The first 6 years, the first 10,000 hours of your career, you're making shitty art that pisses you off, you know, and you have to get through that, and you have to get to a point to where you're comfortable in your own skin, you know, and your own skin is, you know, revealed, you know, in the work that you put out there, when you're not trying to, you know, emulate the artists who you admire, the people that inspired you to start painting or drawing, you know, and you start looking at yourself and saying, oh, wow, I did that good. You know, let me try doing this more. Ooh, let me add this to that, you know. So, and then when you get good at that, that's when you come up with, again, trying to contribute value, you know, to other people through that. And that's ultimately, I think, that if you're trying to develop an internal industrial complex with your creativity, you know, I think that's where it starts. And then ultimately you connect with other visionaries, you know, who have corporate models, large and small, you know, that you can connect with and create dynamic projects.
All right, I'm gonna come back to a lot of things you mentioned, and I'm going to.
Yeah, so, I guess I sort of agree with all of you in the sense that we've been creating art, since the first person went into cave drawing, and drew a picture of an animal. So I feel like we've been creating and consuming art just, even in our day-to-day lives. I mean, think about what to wear, and, there isn't depending on how you define art, Indian housewives, at certain times of the year, they'll go make these elaborate drawings in front of their doors, and that's art, So it's sort of, I think where we're going is something else. It's sort of like, how do you make a living as an artist? I think that, so I would say that maybe also sort of what we're talking about. I agree this is a great time to be there with the long tail kind of art, or really getting into niche audiences. I also think that there is a lot of ways of being that are being explored. For example, there's a lot of talk about universal basic income, and it might even happen here in California. There's a lot of interest in that. And then you can think, well, as an artist with something like that, what would we do with that? What kind of power would we have, and what kind of art could be created? Let's start with that.
I like this kind of like me and Stephen, we speak about, our woes when it comes down to, having time to create our art. And it, that time, that very unique sense of time that you need for yourself to create that art. And if such a universal income was available, it could change how many people may find themselves to be artists. And in that ability to artistically recreate their environment because they have space to think. Like seriously, I think one of the greatest, like when you were mentioning the income, it really sparked up this idea where, again, you and I discussed, but even further, that if an individual had time to develop their senses and had the time to develop, to bring richness to their sense of entertainment. Like if we had richer entertainment, like entertainment that had substance, entertainment that is what we create, and not just your dribble that is quick, easy, fast food, you move on. But if you had content that was rich, what would your audience, your culture, your environment, how would they respond to that? What could come from that if their entertainment was richer and filled with much of like, instead of giving you sewage, I'm giving you water. As if I'm just exchanging one liquid for the other, if I'm assuming I'm acquiring liquid as a sewage. Thank you. I want to get back to that, and if I could.
Oh, I'll just make a quick comment, also just related to what Munchie was saying. I agree with what everyone is saying. I think that in the future, not that even that far away, maybe 50 years out at most, I would think that, everybody will be forced to make art. Because
create or die.
In some way, we will move to a meeting economy. Not that we don't already have a meeting economy that's facilitated by money, but we'll move to a meeting economy. Our time will be much greater. Much of the things that technology facilitates is getting rid of certain kinds of tasks that are in some sense repetitive and mundane. And so in our artistic creations, we will be driven to activities where we find meaning. And education will follow the model of more and more people being supported and thinking about how is it that you want to live out your life as an expression and as an expressive creation itself, as your life as an artistic creation, not just the products that you make that are artistic within it. So I think also if you want like a mini example, if UBI functions in a certain way, universal basic income functions in a certain way, and everyone then decides, yes, I'm not going to try and supplement my income by going to make some other meaningless object. I'm going to go make, a Zine, or I'm gonna, I'll make a collective with my friends, and, I mean, one of the things that you might think about in such a scenario is, will we just reconstruct some of the problems that inherently come from an economic system, but now it'll be focused on the distribution of meaning through artistic products? Or will there be something inherently different because it's art that's being done as opposed to just moving pieces of paper that have some value because of the global exchange?
No, I'm imagining just if we exchange our goods to be like, how could you enrich my life or
Yeah, that's right.
entertain my time? That sounds like a very catastrophic but vibrant way of exchange. Here, I have this book. I feel like this exchange whatever you gave me last week.
Isn't that what social practice starts to kind of play with this idea that what you may do in the studio as an artist, that practice, there's a way that it could also maybe move out of the studio into like maybe your community. And the way that you're influencing that community, right? The way that whatever thought you may have brought to it, that's the value. So it's not the thing. So we're moving kind of the commercial gallery element. We're also having an art happen outside of cultural institutions. So money isn't involved. So what the artist is trying to do is trying to have the community reflect on what is art, right? And then also the artist is also stretching maybe what they do in terms of what they consider the practice of art, right? Because it's now has even maybe more of a social component, and social means just your community, like the 10 houses that are within your radius, right? And that 5 of the houses have little kids, and so now you have every Friday you do an open art table. Because you know that someone told you that some of the kids might want to go to Oakland School of the Arts. They got to put together a portfolio. So you know that all the kids are want to apply for the middle school. So you, all right, set up a anything. And then maybe you know someone else that actually works there. Could you maybe take these 5 kids and train them all? See what I'm saying? So reflecting and thinking about how you, because that's it. Because everyone's laying out the pieces there. Because I mean, that's it. That's part of it. Like the model has to look slightly different. So maybe it's not about branding, which is a very big part of individual marketing right now, right? But
I don't want to interrupt you for a moment, but we have one more person that we want to ask that very same question too.
Oh,
Sorry, no, please.
Well, what I was going to say is along similar lines. I have 0 answers, but I have a lot of curiosities about this. And one is just about visual literacy and linguistic literacy, and what's going to happen there, whether visual literacy is eclipsing verbal linguistic literacy, or if they're going to reinforce each other, or what's going to happen with that. I'm curious about, just books, because I feel like everyone has a book that saved their life, I hope that will be still true in the future. And I was just visiting an old professor last week, and we were talking about MFA programs and how, we're kind of going into a generation where the majority of the generation might not be able to afford a basic college education, much less an MFA. And I love school, I love thinking, but MFAs, the academic institution has just always been too limited, just so way too limited. And so this moment of this kind of mass inaccessibility of higher education for art, I hope will reinforce, everything, all these platforms that each of us have brought up. And I'm curious what that's going to look like. I'm curious how the fight is going to play out between the corporations winning our imaginations without institutions to fight back against that. But we have our communities of artists. And so what these communities are going to continue to build and develop.
I do enjoy, I feel you mentioned something that is instrumental about the academic institutions in response to how, I want to get into that just briefly, how they have found a way to take art and made it within the landscape or within the lens of being an action that can only be afforded by particular individuals within a social, economic landscape. Like these people are socially, economically capable of being an artist, like living the life of artists. And, you know, this particular life that we say artists should have, the ability to, you know, invest in their time in creating. And a lot of times we see most artists working 2 to 3 jobs, similar to everyone else. They may have went to school for something else and they find themselves working sushi restaurant or any other number of jobs out there. And they may not have the vast room to explore their creative capacity. It seems that at one end, we're talking about how art will be available to be produced by everyone, but we're seeing now that art is only being, if you are born and if you are aware, or if you had connections within certain academics, and then you extend that academics to you know, galleries, like, oh, I know this person from this person connected me to this gallery, and they become the visual voice for what is considered degeneration because they become the gatekeepers to that experience. Like, you know, academics becoming the gatekeepers to experience, but people can't afford to even entertain, enter that experience.
I think one thing is that there's a collaborative element that happens more outside of the institutions than inside the institutions to a degree. And Xiao and I talk about this a lot because we both do collaborative like creating with our clients. And that's something that I did an MFA, it was fantastic, and I was like, here's what's missing. Like the vulnerability, like the space for vulnerability is missing. And so I left the institution and created something else. So I think there's a lot of value being created there. But the economic question is like, what is the answer to that? Is it the individual platforms? Is it the universal basic income? A lot of it comes down to like society valuing art, not valuing art. When does society value art? What role as artists do we have in shifting that, creating opportunities for each other? I think there's so many challenges to that, so many really, 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 really fraught challenges to just even taking off work for an afternoon to be able to have a conversation, to be able to commiserate about how tired we are of working, and all of the obstacles in our way to being able to make more time for art, and especially collaborative art. But I think I hope that we have time to kind of talk more about what everyone thinks on that front.
So with that being said, I'm going to gloss over the last one because again, we just opened one question and pretty much answers 3 questions. So I'm just going to open up the platform and I'm going to ask one question, and if anyone wants to answer that question, I open the floor to you. As an artist, do you believe that you speak just for yourself or for your collective?
I'm going to pass that, jump in. I think that I have to say, I think I speak for myself. I think that hasn't always been, and speaking as a person who's does literary history of U.S. Black writers, the whole notion of being able to ask a question, use your writing or your music or your art to answer that question is a relatively recent space that US Black artists at least have created for themselves. At a certain point, they just said, okay, we're not gonna write works to try to explain our lives to other people. We're actually going to now just undertake, this is the time. No racism hasn't been solved, but we need to be able to step in, pursue our questions about ourselves, and other people will engage our work where they do. And of course, the work continues to open up amazing questions and be transformative, but that in literature, that time was around somewhere between mid-80s about till 1990, and since then you get really amazing stuff. So I happened to step in and start being more serious about her in the mid-90s, and so I answer my own questions, but I think that I reflect, my work becomes a contact point between people who are not Black and Black people's experience. And so for people who don't look at a lot of Black art, who've never been to the Studio Museum in Harlem when it was up and active, and my work may be the most intimate conversation they ever have with Black people about representation and image. And so I don't speak for the collective, but my work sometimes is the voice of the collective for people outside of my particular group.
That's good. Thank you. Thank you. Whether anyone else wants to maybe share that, because I'll go to the next question. In what way do you see your individual account of events as an account of the collective experience? Which I feel like you kind of touched on. Anyone else interested in playing with that question?
I think just gonna say similar to like your answer. I think you can't begin. It's part of like one question. The idea that the idea when creating work, it's like I have to make myself implicit. It has to come from a personal place. I have to be part of that narrative that I'm constructing, as well as how I'm exploring it. But it seems that I have to be part of it, and that connects me with the audience and the audience that I'm envisioning when creating a work. But I'm also creating an individual story. Like it is a unique turn of a story. So I'm trying to do both. There's like two things that are happening. It's like trying to express the individual, but also know that what you're looking at is influenced by cultural aesthetics, and like there's a collective thought that's behind it, but then there's also a need for individual expression. That's totally there.
Good.
I also add that humans are a collective species, just like termites need each other and ants need each other. We biologically cannot survive without each other. So I think even as I'm in my studio, going crazy and going into my own mind, I know I'm inadvertently communicating, about my collective existence, and indirectly talking about my connections with other human beings.
To piggyback on that,
wait, first you gotta say hello to everybody. Say your
I'm
name.
Tira. I'm sorry, I was calling from the tennis match. I'm sorry. But I hopefully as far as like in myself writing, that you can be a reference, that your writing can be something that people can come and collectively use or refer or get something out of.
That's a solid answer. Thank you. I'm going to jump. Thank you. Finally, you made it. If you can share a potential roadmap to an alternative future, starting from events today in 2018, what strategies for future existence would you propose?
I think that phrase "alternative future" is pretty interesting. Like, is there a future that's in line that we're fated for that you just keep talking about?
Well, I feel like there is a particular temporal kind of destiny that we have all collectively been sold to. Like, this is what our future is going to look like. And they show you the products, and they show you the stuff, and they show you the models, and they show you the cars, and they show you everything. But that's the future they're selling you. This is still on the showroom floor. If we had alternative showrooms, what would those showrooms propose besides material gain? Like, what are the things that we wish to propose for an alternative future besides the one they have on the show floor today? Like, in most science fictions, I find that everyone of color is gone and there's just white people, and no one talks about how that happened. Like, no one talks about how that happened, but it happened and we just move on. So in our collective psyches, there's this doomsday that we all collectively share culturally. Like, as a person of color, I don't see myself in the future, so I'm expecting a genocide somewhere down the line. Like, somewhere down the line, they're going to get rid of us, aren't they? I don't see us in their futures. And I speak that for myself, but there is that collective, like, if you had a future that was shown to you and you don't like it, what else you got?
I think, for me, I think that when I'm looking at the actual material situation of what everybody's facing now, which is just the particular situation here on Earth, we have a propensity to, like, constantly talk about what is possible, what's going to happen in the future, how things are going to be arranged, potentially past, like economic currency or taking things really far. And I mean, things like that could happen, but they're increasingly looking less likely because I think we haven't really learned how to teach each other and create within limitation, which might sound negative, but if you think about, like, we constantly think that we can grow. Everything is all about, like, getting bigger, going further, expanding your reach. And it seems to have gotten us into a bit of trouble, meaning that there could be less of a future than we really think. And it's hard for human nature to, reality is not something to be dealt with at the moment. We're not willing to look at the actual situation that we're in. We're not willing to think that some of the problems with human creativity and artistic vision may be that we haven't figured out how to limit and ethicize, if that's even a word, our imaginations, and to say just because it's in your imagination doesn't necessarily mean that it's correct. There are plenty of creative works that were destructive to others. You could consider imperialism a creative work. It was an envisioning of a particular system. It doesn't mean that they should have done it, obviously. I mean, it may be a very small group of people who come up with that vision and really have a vested interest in enacting it, whereas everybody else is essentially just a pawn in the system. But I think that if I am thinking of where creativity, and that involves everything, essential forms like music, novels, philosophy, painting, etc., in addition to the more invisible, like design elements, the much more open definition of art and human imagination, what it is we're going to have to figure out how to cope with the idea that things cannot constantly progress. That maybe we're getting to a point in our story where we have to cope with an ending to something. And sometimes endings aren't always absolute. They lead to somewhere else, but nonetheless, they are endings. And we have to think about what that means for us, So let me ask you this question. So in this ending, could you just elaborate what alternatives or what solutions would you have with conclusions that you see coming up? I'm not sure that I do have answers for that. Like, I don't know that I've really I'm trying right now to come up with some sort of philosophical, I'm playing around with a philosophical idea in my own writing of like what it looks like when you hit a point where these things are incontrovertible. Like it's an imaginative scenario, it's a hypothetical. But what if you were facing down. Like, there's no changing this anymore. We are going to hit a place where, you know, civilization will be rolled back possibly to an archaic time because of things that are outside of our control, so to speak. You know, the natural consequences of what we do here and the decisions that we make. And, you know, how human nature can even cope with that idea. And I mean, to me, that's very important in envisioning the future, because constantly we're being told, like, look, you're going to have to change your behavior in terms of the economy, how you consume everything from entertainment to apples. And so it's just like, how do we envision ourselves possibly like saying these are the places where imagination can become hurtful or overgrown?
I see you percolating over there.
No, I was just gonna say, but it's funny because it makes me think that that's also related to like a Western idea of like time and temporality. And only because a friend of mine was a woman that I had met who was part of an art collective that was out in Philly. She had proposed a different system of time that was.
You mean Rashida Phillips?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So I just thought that was just kind of fun, because it's talking about people always like, you know, people of color time, like late time. And if that was actually real time, or like the Aztec calendar, right? Like we thought we knew what the dates were when it was for the end of the world, but we really didn't know, right? So I just think that it has to do, because if you look at Western idea of time, which is totally wicked. But if you have a different set of time, which a lot of cultures, it's this. So the idea of cycle or how things ebb and flow are based more on sometimes like this, but I'm open for it being square, but I'm open for it to be triangular or different. But I think if it's like this, then I think that what comes with philosophical idea is that like there's the beginning point, there's the middle, and there's an end. Whereas I think that if it's the structure changes or how you think about that particular structure, you know, of course those are things that we can't grasp yet, but it also could be something that's pulled together by collective ideas as opposed to one, because in some ways, yeah, that could be maybe when we reaching it, a possibility, but as opposed to linear, which it becomes finite, like there, over there.
Well, I don't think it's finite. I'm just saying, like, there are some consequences that we're looking at. That whether you live in India or here, and whether you ascribe to a westernized understanding of the world, I'm just using like, you know, like I'm basically using a writing idea of like, this is what plot structure looks like, to say like, how can you tell that story? How can we come up with a narratology, I guess, to understand like, we may be living in a unique point in time. It may not all be circular. It may not, it could be. I mean, more than likely, yeah, humans die off, something else comes up. It happens all the time, and that's fine. But we also are humans. And so, I mean, we have a vested interest insofar as of the fact that we are the species of like, can we stick around, or is our destiny to just be one of these cyclical, we were there, then we were gone. And that's totally fine too, but you know, it's up to us to decide whether we're okay with that, whether that is just that's okay, or if there's something else that maybe we can do or react to.
I feel like that's sort of a curse of our neurology though. Like there's really no use in a human being trying to change the course of the entire human organism. Like for me to sit in bed and say, how can I shift the, you know, where it looks like all human beings are going, all billions of us are going. What can I write? What can I paint that shifts the future away from what seems to be inevitable? You know, like for me, I would rather go into those thoughts with not much purpose, because there just is no use in it. You know, there's just a momentum that has been happening for millennia before I was born. So for me, it's pretty egotistical to think that I gotta come up with something, I gotta figure some shit out. The best thing I can do is, connect to the people with people in the room, try to have as warm of interactions as I can, or actually you can say warm, as meaningful interactions as I possibly can, and even thinking about things beyond humanity, because, because I get cosmic with my thought process, and I start thinking about humanity is, just a cough of this planet. It's we haven't been here for that long. We're not going to be here that long. And I'm intrigued by being a collection of molecules that have just suddenly come together and have started thinking about being universal and thinking about connections and all these ideas, being, what Carl Sagan, talked about of being a piece of the universe that is perceiving itself, and then bursting apart again into the vastness of everything else, of time and space. So yeah, I guess in terms of trying to maintain the best mental health that I can, I know that, I don't know, like I said, my time is short here, I would rather have it be as, I don't want to say enjoyable, but I have to say meaningful and productive as I can make it, and then again, let my molecules burst apart into whatever they're going to be after that,
So you're looking for an explosive death, like.
I mean,
all right, spontaneous combustion, possible, I'm saying.
I mean, it's the worms and bacteria that break me down and scatter me, ultimately is, when you when you think about it in time, it is, So anyway, go ahead.
No, I like where we're going with this, because there's a sense that we know that we have a limitation here. Like, as you're describing, there's this real limitation that we're perceiving that we're not here for long. And the response to that, we're not here for long, is we might as well make this shit as meaningful as possible. Is our inherent response to the stimuli that we're being, confronted with. We know that the Earth is at a decay rate much faster than maybe even our scientists are being honest with themselves. We do know that with that environmental collapse comes particular flavors of chaos that we here in the US may not be familiar with, or not to, we may be familiar with, but it's always through a box, TV, some type of media device. But our response has always been, we might as well make this moment meaningful. And as we look at our identities, it is this sense of trying to make this experience meaningful. As I've listened to each and every one of you at this table, I realize that it is the narratives and the stories that makes up the identity to try to make a meaningful experience to our existential end. And we're trying to make some good art out of it. So.
Just following up on Joshua's theme, I guess we're all carbon-based life forms. We were in fact all here because it starts with it. So in terms of explosive creation. Yeah.
These people.
Exactly, we will be here.
But there's also this kind of theory that I don't want to leave this on this is not to leave it on a doom note, and I'm not. But our existence is to create decay. If we accelerate that decay, that we are living up to our purpose. The faster that we bring decay, the more meaningful our lives are. Because if entropy is what it is, then decay is what it is. And if we are doing what we're doing, then we might as well make the decay meaningful. And as artists, we make meaningful decay. So I like to thank everyone on that. This has been an amazing talk. Everyone.
Cool, thank you. Thank you.
No one has been murdered or maimed. Good job, everybody. Everyone's alive. No one's bleeding on the ground. No one is stabbing each other in the corner. No one's making phone calls to loved ones. I'm sorry, I'm going to jail. So this was amazing, and thank you, everyone, for your time and your patience. Good job, everyone. Eat the snacks.
Was this recorded?
Yes, and it's still being recorded. Thank you to our cameraman, everyone. No. Yeah. No posing. Thank you. Okay, now over there. All right. How do we turn this thing off? How do we turn this thing off?
We hurt ourselves.
Thank you.
Did you enjoy yourself?
Yeah.